Okay, so in April, which is about 2 months back, I was interning with this institute called Pratham. Some of you may have heard about it. They work for this. They're basically not for profit, and they work in education and livelihood. And work primarily is to conduct research and take certain actions to skill adults who are uneducated or unemployed. So they have all these skilling initiatives, and they do all that work, and they have schools that they have for children and all of that. So I was interning with them this summer, and I was in their research lab, and in my work we worked on the story of migration, of interstate migration in India, short-term migration, and we met this a person in Ghatkopar East. His name is Suresh Pawar. So he is from Nanded, and those of you who've kept up with the news would know that Nanded comes under this region called Marathwada in Maharashtra, and that region has been facing a severe drought crisis for the last 6 years or so. And of course, the state of agriculture is terrible. Naturally, there's no water, and farmers have to now have like look for other options. A lot of them have a huge debt on their heads, and they have to pay that, and it's really tense for them. And we all know that, we've been reading about it. A lot of coverage that we've read about is farmer suicides, which a lot of farmers have to take, which is a step a lot of farmers have to take, which is tragic. But what we don't generally read about is a phenomenon that is now called short-term migration, or distress migration. Distress migration because these farmers are facing a lot of distress, and they have to migrate from their homes to look for livelihoods, to look for work, to look essentially for money somewhere else, usually metro cities like Mumbai. We found this place in Ghatkopar East, and I don't exactly remember the address. We will put it in the bio. But there's a huge ground there, and about 3 to 4 years ago, all of these migrants had set up camps. Like the entire ground was filled with camps, and they would live there, and essentially that was their uh, home, if you will. And all these farmers, they were here to essentially work in and be a part of what is the informal economy. And they were either construction workers, laborers, carpenters, whatever work they could find. They were cleared out recently, and we visited that site again. And the ground had been cleared out, but they'd found places right next, or right, so just around that ground. And they were, number one, living in not very habitable conditions. Essentially, there were 3-4 families in one bedroom house, kind of a room, a place. Now, there's two kinds of migration that India has. There's long term, there's short term. Long term is when a person who is from one place who travels to another place to look for work, which is a lot of people. Short term migration is usually for farmers, is usually seen in the case of farmers where they stay in their farms or work on their farms for the monsoon season, and then they come back or go to a metro city or a bigger city to find work for the rest of the year. And we met a lot of these people from largely from two villages, that's Nanded and Latur. We talked to them, and I remember we talked to this man. He was staying there, and he had a pretty decent life compared to the other people that we talked. And but there's certain statements that he made, and I have it here. And he said that, quote unquote, we would have stayed there, but there is no food to eat. Essentially, what he said, that I would love to be back home, but what is the point if I can't even survive? I have to be here because I have to survive. There's no other chance. I would have loved to go back to his home. All of these farmers, they've had bigger homes, maybe your own villages. You'll see that your house, like your nani ka ghar or all of that, would be like this huge place with a lot of area everywhere. And that's what they're usually from too. And then to come here is I mean, it hurts if you feel bad. So that is something that came out. And then there were a lot of problems that they had with their living conditions, with house, with paying the rent, with water. When they don't get water, they have to get tankers. How do you manage all of that? And something that we then, in the article that is now published on The Wire, you can read it out, it's there. A problem that we focused on was children's education. Now, we found a 2019 UNESCO report that said that among 10.7 million children, which between the age of 6 to 11 years, who were living with a seasonal migrant in a rural household in 2013, about 28% of them were illiterate or had dropped out before completing primary school. We met people there and we asked them, how do you take care of your children's education? A lot of them, especially young kids around the same 5-6 years of age, they are still going through their primary education. And how do you follow, or how do you take care of your children's education when you keep traveling back and forth? Doesn't it hamper their education? Doesn't it interrupt or come in the way? And we found that children usually do travel with their parents when they go back and forth. And we talked to the school. There was a BMC school running right next to that ground, and we talked to the teachers there, and they told us that the children stay there for about a few months. They go back to the schools in the village for a few months, then they come back, and that flexibility is there, but it definitely hampers their education. How much they can cover up with the syllabus, all of that is definitely hampered. But they just said that what else do we do about it? I mean, if they're going, we give them the TC, but of course there's going to be a difference in the quality of education that he will receive in a village or in a BMC school here. There's going to be the climate is going to be different. The kids, coming back, it's a lot for a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, but they just said that's not much that you can do. And they didn't really seem particularly concerned. However, when we also asked them about the other children who were slightly older, maybe in 11th or 12th grade, and they said that they usually left back home, or wherever they continue their schooling. So a lot of their kids are back home. Again, another burden on them is to take care of their children's education, make sure that they can at least support them, help them get into a college, get a degree, maybe get a job. Because from what we understood as we talked to them was that they do not want their children getting into farming. Farming for a lot of people is they worship it, all of that's the reason why cow they worship water. All of this is sacred to them. They don't really follow, if they have a lot of traditional knowledge about farming, and it has a special status to them, it has special value to them. And to see, especially if farming, you've been doing farming for generations, when you suddenly have to leave it, or your kid cannot, or you don't think that it's lucrative anymore to continue the farming, they definitely feel hurt by the status. We met this one person who is pretty he understood, he actually would say out loud what a farmer's value is and all of that. And he was just definitely extremely disappointed with the way things are going. But he was like, okay, we have to survive, we can't really think of all of this. A lot of them were actually reluctant, or just not wanting to, hesitant to talk to us, because there's so many people, so many journalists, so many people who just come to us and take all of these details, take our numbers, names, and then nothing happens. So why should we even talk to them? Latest figures tell us that 42% of India's land area is under drought. And in 2016, the central government told the Supreme Court that the drought had at that point affected 330 million people. That was 2016, this is 2019, numbers would have naturally gone up. Living in 266 districts across 11 states in the country. The latest report we found by the National Crime Records Bureau, it was in 2015, which recorded a total of 8,007 farmer suicides all over the country. the leading causes of which were either bankruptcy or indebtedness. Now, these migrants and farmers, all of these short-term migrants, naturally have, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. But we see that, number one, it hasn't really come up a lot. Farmer suicides were definitely somewhere in election issue this in this election, but we don't really hear about short-term migrants. I hadn't particularly understood this in this depth before this internship. And so why is that? So what we realized was that these migrants, they're all over the country, and they're not unified as such. They don't have one single voice, and because they're really not a part of, they're not under the radar, as so to say. And so essentially, because they keep traveling back and forth, they don't have a permanent voter ID. If they do, they don't vote at time. These migrants, definitely they have a lot of demands, and this is an area where the state definitely has a lot of work to do, but we don't really hear about it even in the papers, or with from politicians, because they never really talk about it. We try to understand why is that, and we realized that these migrants are all over the country. Usually a lot of them, most of them, keep traveling back and forth, so you need, either don't have a voter ID, or if you do, you don't vote, or you're just not really concerned about that, because your major concern is to uh, take care of your basics first. And so we realized that because they're so fragmented, and essentially they lack a single unified voice, or because of that, they fail to form a substantial vote bank for the politicians to even look at. I know the terms that I use may be a little harsh, but it's kind of, it's how it is, or at least that's what I found out, that's what I saw. And because they're, we don't really see them out loud, so there's different groups of people who have a voice, they have made unions, so to speak, and they are out there. But these migrants, they're generally not together, and I think that's something that would have helped them. But because you're so fragmented, how do you even come together? How do you make your demands? How do you put it out there when you don't even know how it works? The rural economy is, it needs a lot of attention from this state, and so do a lot of seasonal migrants in all over the country. And one thing that we see that the state uses to tackle the agricultural crisis or the debt crisis is to give freebies, to waive off loans. And while that is, I mean, it's okay, yeah, that definitely may help the farmer or in individual cases, but that is not a long-term solution. And we need the political will. Politicians need to show the political will to go out there to actually sit and think about how you can end this once and for all.